I'd like to thank everybody for coming today to our third annual Biopolicy Summit. It's entitled Improving Reproducibility of Research Through Digital Tools, Technologies, and Laboratory Automation. I'm Len Friedman. I'm the president of the Global Biological Standards Institute, GBSI. So as I mentioned, this is our third Biopolicy Summit. Our first two were in Washington, D.C., where we are located, and they were essentially half-day meetings focused on a very specific science policy issue that relates to reproducibility, with always a solution set in mind. And in that respect, this meeting, our third meeting, which is an entire day, and we've moved it to San Francisco, it continues on that theme, but in a new space, and that is automation and the lab of the future. And we're very, very excited to get to know you all, and hopefully you will get to know us. What I want to do in the first couple of minutes to sort of set the stage is to bring the idea of the lab of the future and lab automation in context. And the context for us is really reproducibility. And some of you have seen this slide. This is some work that we published a couple of years ago in PLOS Biology. We do indeed have a problem as a scientific community. And these are, I'm not going to go through each of these. These are published. These are papers that, early papers, including the sort of tipping point paper, I like to call it, from Glenn Begley and Lee Ellis, when Glenn was at Amgen, that report very, very, at the time, shockingly high irreproducibility rates in various contexts. In the Amgen case, it was 53 high impact oncology papers. And what you see here is that even conservatively, a 50% irreproducibility rate is really quite concerning. And this was followed up by a number of papers, including a survey that Nature published. And in fact, this is a paper that Manya Baker, who I don't know if she's arrived yet, but she will be on our panel this afternoon, that surveyed 1,500 scientists on questions that relate to reproducibility. And as you can see, a vast majority of scientists from the biological community, chemistry, even physics community, have reported significant issues in terms of experiencing reproducibility of their own work or someone else's work. And so we've tried as an organization, as many others have as well, to sort of deconstruct the various drivers for irreproducibility. And I point to a white paper we published, and you can download it from our website. You can just go to the website and find it, or this is the URL that will take you directly to this white paper. It's called The Case for Standards in Life Sciences. And really the point of this slide is to really demonstrate that there are multiple drivers. This is a very, very complicated issue. Oh, Manya, I just showed a slide that you authored. Here it is. This is a complex issue with multiple drivers, and there is no quick, easy fix. There are issues of incomplete protocol reporting, of reagent variability and lack of validation, which is an area that will, I think, probably most closely relates to lab automation, but also experimental bias and differences in techniques and differences and inefficiencies in reporting. All of this, I think, can positively be impacted by lab automation, by the kinds of tools and technologies that you all are working on. So I think that by sort of bringing together all of us here that are really focused on both the issues, but more importantly, the solutions of the so-called reproducibility crisis, we can really have a very, very potent impact, I think a historical positive impact on correcting the issues around reproducibility. I also want to put it in an economic context as well. And this is a paper we published a couple of years ago. It's a relatively controversial paper. This was published in PLOS Biology. And we did an economic analysis of the cost of irreproducibility, and to really cut to the chase, even if you conservatively apply a 50% irreproducibility rate, and I would argue that that's probably a very, very conservative number, we put the number that is applied to preclinical research alone, and this was in 2014, I believe, at $28 billion. Now, that number, that number riled a lot of people, but even if that number is off by a certain percentage or even by 10 or 15%, it's a huge number. Huge number. It's a number in the billions of dollars, and I think that there are tremendous opportunities here to reduce that number and save a tremendous amount of resources, both private and public. The drivers for that we determined were the four largest that generate this $28 billion number include laboratory protocols, data analysis and reporting, study design, and biological reagents and reference materials, all of which I believe will be touched on in this one-day meeting. So keep that in mind, that any improvement in any of these four areas are going to generate tremendous opportunities in saving billions of dollars. So I would argue that that the formal quality systems that are in place primarily in industry that are sorely lacking in academia, again, have tremendous opportunities in terms of and I don't know who coined this phrase, but I like it, the democratization of science through accessible, affordable laboratory tools and technologies, again, that many of you in this audience are developing. So I think that there's tremendous opportunity here. And, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to imagine that automation through robotics or other technologies can help solve issues around reproducibility. And I found this online. Even Slate Magazine is thinking about these issues. And I was also thinking the other day about, of course, unintended consequences, and I hope this afternoon at our panel discussions, we have two slated, that we have an opportunity to talk about that. One, of course, is whenever anybody thinks about automation, they think about jobs, and this was actually in the New York Times Sunday Review just last week. And it wasn't talking about biological automation per se, but I think that it was an interesting piece that I think, in some respects, disputes this idea through some very specific examples that we don't have time to talk about now, but maybe we can get into in the panel discussion. So the agenda for the day is we're thinking about automation in a very large context here. We're going to, this morning, in the first session, talk about where and what the lab of the future looks like. We're going to then talk about some case studies in automation. We'll then segue into examples of experimental design and experimental execution. And then also, in terms of implementation, we must consider publication and the sharing of data. And we'll touch on all of those in a very ambitious agenda, and finish the day with two, I think, really engaging panel discussions that I'm certainly looking forward to. So again, just a little paid or unpaid advertising. I hope during this day you also get to know us, that is GBSI. We're based, as I mentioned, in Washington, D.C. We essentially are a policy advocacy institute, we, by definition, need to work with all of you. We work with academic institutions, with industry, with policy and professional organizations, with funders and journals and government agencies, including and especially NIH. I hope we have time during the breaks and during lunch and during cocktails to to discuss GBSI. So that's interesting. I want to point out a couple of things before I finish. One is that you may or may not know it, but by registering for this meeting, you have received a complimentary individual membership for GBSI for 2017. You can come to our booth, the GBSI booth, back there in the exhibition room for more information. There's also a chart in your folder about what the benefits of membership are. I'd also like to point out, in particular, some sponsors and partners. We've had a long-term a relationship of support from ATCC, the Cell and Microbial Repository. That was not Freudian. They founded GBSI, and they have continued to provide the vast majority of our support, and we are very, very grateful to them for that. I'd also like to acknowledge LRIG and LabSite in particular for partnering with us on this meeting. And finally, and really, this was really a combined effort of a really terrific steering committee that conceived this meeting and reached out to many of you as speakers and attendees. That's me, and Nancy Kelly from Nancy J. Kelly and Associates, Will Canine from Opentron, Doug Densmore, who is not here but will be presenting remotely. He's at Boston University. Jim Inglace from NCATS at NIH, and Lenny Tettleman from Protocols.io. So I thank you all for your very, very deep engagement and hard work on this meeting. Finally, I think this is finally, follow us on Twitter at gbsi.org. And specifically to engage in the discussion on the Biopolicy Summit, it's #LabAutomation. So with that, I think Nancy Kelly has a few important pieces of information. And again, thank you all for coming today, and I'm looking forward to a really engaging meeting.